British Columbia Institute of Technology acknowledges that our campuses are located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish nations of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh.
From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Hello and good afternoon. I'm Grace McLeod and back for your 12 p.m. news updates. To begin our news, some more on the BC transit situation. It's another rough day for commuters in the Lower Mainland today, as Coast Mountain buses continue to be halted for a second straight day. The Crow's Ben Bugara spoke with a labor expert to find out more about why these types of strikes are so difficult to resolve.
Transit supervisors for Coast Mountain Bus Company continue to strike today with no sign of a deal being reached. All parties involved said their pieces at various press conferences yesterday afternoon. However, no road to a resolution is in sight at this stage. Dr. Mark Thompson, professor emeritus at the Sauder School of Business, says higher levels of government may need to get involved in order to get both sides talking again.
Sometimes the higher levels of government call the parties together and say, this has got to stop now. You do something about it or we'll make life unpleasant for you. Kind of a Godfather proposition.
Bus and C-Bus service is expected to resume tomorrow, but further strikes could take place soon if a deal isn't reached. Ben Bugara, BCIT's The Crow.
Continuing with transportation here in BC, BC Highway Patrol says it has stopped 177 drivers in 6 weeks in the Kootenays for driving without valid insurance. Officers say they've heard a range of excuses from thinking it would be renewed to automatically blaming mom and dad. Inspector Chad Badgery says operating without insurance can lead to paying a $598 ticket. He says uninsured drivers can also be financially responsible for a crash and expensive towing costs. And over the last 50 years, smoking rates in Canada have seen a massive decline from that, but that does not mean concerns aren't there. Reporter Max Matchman has the story.
It is National Non-Smoking Week, and the rates of tobacco consumption are on a steady decline provincially. But for BC Lung CEO Chris Lamb, there is still room for concern.
We roughly have about 9.5% of our population who still identifies as a smoker. There's a good chunk of those people that actually really do want to quit. They just can't.
Chris added,
really the game of big tobacco and the vapor industry to get that nicotine into the human body as soon as they quickly can, because it's their business model.
For Chris, his biggest concern is the irreversible cognitive effects of having a nicotine addiction at a young age. Max Mashman, BCIT News, The Crow.
Hello, and we are welcome here with Max. Max, a few questions following your story. What solutions are being proposed to bring the smoking rate down further?
Well, Grace, Chris, who I talked to in that interview, said that he wanted to see a total ban of cigarettes and vapor products that's grandfathered in. So what this means is essentially anyone who's, like, let's say the ban was implemented this year, right? Anyone who's 19 this year would be allowed to legally continue smoking for the rest of their lives, though 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, anyone who's aging into it would no longer be allowed to smoke. And the essential hope is that would reduce. Chris also stressed the importance of things like nicotine replacement therapies, so that could be patches or gum, and community support in bringing the smoking rate down further.
All right. And weren't vaping products supposed to be a way to help adult smokers quit?
Yeah, so a lot of the initial marketing around vaping products focused on just that, and helping smokers manage their addictions. But they were also including a lot of flavors that were appealing to young people, and we saw big spikes in the youth population around the time vaping was popularized. Vaping companies have also come under a lot of criticism for having vibrant, bright colors and marketing that seem to be designed towards children. And as Chris pointed out to me, vaping essentially works like cigarettes does, and the way that it impacts your dopamine system right away. So there might be a delay with something like a gum or patches, right? But with vaping, it hits you immediately, which kind of reinforces an addictive cycle. And the vape companies, they want to keep you addicted to some extent because that's how they keep getting profits.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Max.
Of course, Chris.
All right. An update from the Ottawa Freedom Convoy that occurred 2 years ago. A judge says it was unreasonable for the Liberal government to use the Emergency Act to quell Freedom Convoy protests in the national capital and at a key border points 2 years ago. In a decision released today, Federal Court Justice Richard Mosley says invocation at the act led to the infringement of constitutional rights. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association and several other groups and individuals have argued in court that Ottawa ushered in the emergency measures without sound statutory grounds. The Public Order Emergency Commission, which carries out a mandatory review after invocation in the Emergency Acts, found that the government met the very high legal standard for using the law. Canada's cap on the number of international students permits it approves over the next 2 years is causing some concern for post-secondary institutions across the country. At the Liberal Cabinet retreat in Montreal yesterday, Immigration Minister Mark Miller announced new limits to the program, including a temporary cap that would reduce the number of new students' visas by 35% this year. Canadian press reporter Nazoud Al-Malis says some schools are worried about the financial impact.
These institutions rely on international student enrollments to boost their revenues, specifically at a time when some provinces have put in tuition freezes and are not necessarily increasing funding enough for these institutions to break even.
And the Council of Ontario Universities and the Association of Atlantic Universities are both speaking out against the cap. On a more international news side, Turkish legislators have started debating a long-delayed bill to approve Sweden's bid to join NATO. This is a step that could remove a major hurdle for the previously non-aligned Nordic country entries into the military alliance. Turkey, a NATO member, has been dragging its feet on ratifying Sweden's accession for more than a year, accusing the country of being too lenient towards groups it regards as security threats. It has been seeking concession from Sweden, including a tougher stance towards Kurdish militants and members of a network that Ankara blames for a failed coup in 2016. Over in China, officials say a magnitude 7.1 earthquake in a remote part of China's western Xinjiang region has killed at least 3 people and caused extensive damage in freezing weather. The officials suggest that the area's sparse population contributes to the very strong quake's low death toll. 5 people were injured, 2 of them seriously, and thousands of people fled their homes. At least 47 houses collapsed. Authorities say power and train services have been restored. Now, in our entertainment news, some of the nominees for Best Pictures are Anatomy of a Fall, Barbie, Killers of the Flower Moon, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. Scorsese was nominated for Best Director. Leonardo DiCaprio, though, was left out of Best Actor. Among the nominations filmed films in the Ukraine war documentary 20 Days in Mariupol, which is a joint production between the Associated Press and PBS's Frontline. And our weather news for today is currently 8 degrees. And a little misty outside. The rain has paused for the time being. No sign of sun just yet, but stay tuned. That is our news update for 12. We will return shortly with sports news.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online.
And welcome back to BCIT The Crow. On to sporting news.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
For sports, we will start with the soccer news.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to.
This is sports on 1680 The Crow.
And welcome back to BCIT The Crow. On to sporting news. For sports, we will start with soccer news. Toronto FC has named Canadian midfielder Jonathan Osorio its new captain. Coach John Herdman says Osorio, who leads the franchise with 341 appearances in all competitions, is a special figure at the MLS club.
You only have to see his connection with kitchen staff, the equipment people, down to the kids at the academy who look up to him as, that player that, went all the way for the club to a championship. He's waited patiently, he's built the experiences, and he's ready.
Osorio succeeds longtime skipper Michael Bradley, who retired at the end of last season. Now on to basketball. A former NBA champion player for the Toronto Raptors is on the move in a trade between two Eastern Conference teams. The Associated Press reporter's Gethin Kulba gives a bit more details.
Kyle Lowry is being traded by the Miami Heat to the Charlotte Hornets for Terry Rozier in a swap of point guards, according to a person with knowledge of the agreement. The Heat are also sending a 2027 first-round draft pick to the Hornets to complete the deal. Rozier figures to be an immediate upgrade for the Heat. He is averaging 23.2 points and 6.6 assists, both career highs, in 30 games this season, and is shooting a career-high 46% as well. The 37-year-old Lowry is averaging 8.2 points and 4 assists this season. I'm Gethin Kulba.
Also in basketball, Cleveland Cavaliers center Tristan Thompson has been suspended 25 games without pay by the NBA for violating its anti-drug policy. The league said Tuesday that Thompson tested positive for ibutamorin, a growth hormone, and a second substance that's commonly used by bodybuilders and weightlifters for muscle enhancement. The 32-year-old will begin serving his suspension Wednesday when the Cavs play the first of 2 games in 3 days at Milwaukee. Thompson is in his second stint with the Cavs, who originally drafted the Canadian with number 4 overall pick in the 2011 draft. He was the member of the 2016 NBA champion team. Our football story for today, the Tennessee Titans have agreed to hire... And that's your news for today.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
BCIT campus where the gardening club just planted these trees. So in the BCIT Journalism program, I learned how to use the professional cameras to film our own news stories, and also the soundboards and mics in the radio booth to host shows for our radio station. I'm Kate Leno in Burnaby for BCIT Magazine.
Microlink, connecting you with your BCIT community. Hello everybody! Welcome to the Winter 2023 edition of the Microlink podcast, part of the Link magazine and brought to you by the BCIT Student Association. Grace Miller is the host of this episode and will give you folks the inside scoop on what it is like to run a small business in Canada throughout and post-pandemic. But before we get started, we respectfully acknowledge that the land on which BCIT's main campuses are located is the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the shared traditional territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam First Nations.
Well, I'm not the most expensive SEO person in Vancouver, definitely not, but it's still an investment that some businesses don't really want to make when they're just starting out. So I
did move into a bigger space in 2023, which was, in retrospect now, it was probably the worst move.
Vancouver's businesses are starting to see revitalization after years of struggle. Small businesses are the backbone of the economy, so of course through these past couple of years of economic hardship, they've been significantly affected. Hi, I'm Grace Miller, a contributor to Microlink. In this episode, I'll take you through the scene of small business in Vancouver and their beginning stages of revitalization. The pandemic and the following spike in inflation have created renowned financial difficulties, and small business owners are not exempt while trying to stay open. Today, the government and other local NGOs have curated different grants and loans to provide some aid to these businesses, to slow factors which prohibit growth. With those funds, along with the savvy skills of these entrepreneurs, the local market is starting to show signs of development. Though the landscape of this industry in Vancouver is still not yet fully recovered, there is hope on the horizon. This is Revitalizing Small Businesses. To start this story, let's go back to the beginning of the pandemic and how small businesses were affected. Whispers of an unknown virus possibly coming to Vancouver stirred tensions among Vancouver's citizens and brought widespread uneasiness to public spaces. It also gave businesses additional hurdles and expenses to keep up with the changing restrictions of operation as the spread of COVID-19 furthered, such as the number of occupants in an enclosed space, necessary plexiglass partitions, and limited operating hours. Restrictions around group gatherings forced businesses in the fitness industry to close their doors to customers altogether. And since weddings were prohibited as part of these restrictions, many businesses within the wedding industry were also halted. To dive into what it was like to be put into this position and to comment on her experience as a two-time small business owner in Vancouver, I spoke with Tanya Albrecht. She's the co-owner of Chunky Squirrel, a search engine optimization services company, and previously worked as a self-employed wedding photographer.
So we used to have a business together as wedding photographers, but then during the pandemic, that was not a great place to be, and so we slowly started shifting and thinking about what else can we do, what are we good at, and I had been working on SEO for our own website for a long time. I had taken some courses and I really enjoy it, and my husband had been building websites for years. So we're like, okay, skills we have and things we enjoy, and also something that we can do from anywhere in the world.
While working as a wedding photographer, Tanya's struggles to maintain customers were common among many small business owners. Another industry that had similar hardship due to gathering restrictions was fitness. I spoke with Marlene Amando, owner of Reform Pilates, to share her experience pivoting on the path to revitalization. She just moved her business from a larger studio in downtown Vancouver to a smaller location further away from the downtown core. Her downsizing is due to a lack of customers filling up her slots in her larger classes.
So the afternoon classes dried up. I continued to teach my privates, but it was just a big hassle getting people through the door. And I mean, part of the reason is that the downtown core has changed. People are not coming, the people are working hybrid, they're working from home. They've left Vancouver, like the downtown core itself has actually changed. So it's a combination of just literally not coming into work as often, or changing the commute around work. So like if they are coming in, they're coming in to work and then they go home and do their Pilates at home or do their fitness at home, or they're like, it's more home centric, like, because we were home for during the pandemic, we all got a taste of what it's like to not need to go to work, I guess, the same way. And then the economy has been kind of like, it definitely has affected our, Pilates isn't something that's on top, like food is usually what people want to put on their table, and they're going to pay for that first.
Problems from the years of restrictions and shutdowns are now bleeding into the current livelihood of businesses. Some are thriving, and unfortunately, others are still trying to remain afloat. After constant readjustments, Marlene managed to make it through to the other side of restrictions limiting customers coming into her business. Now, both she and Tanya are trying to navigate the aftermath of the pandemic as business owners. Even though all the restrictions have been lifted, other factors are still limiting customer growth, especially for the fitness industry, as Marlene notes. In her case specifically, her biggest challenge is currently paying back her Canadian Emergency Business Account loan. This is a federal loan for up to $40,000 for small businesses and nonprofit organizations. Paying back the CEBA loan has become a common problem, and many owners are facing some hard choices, including Marlene.
The loan's up for payment. I have closed my studio because I couldn't pay the rent because things did change. Things changed in a way that I did not anticipate changing, that I maybe, I want to say should have, but it was hard to see into the future how much it would change, because I wouldn't have guessed that it would have changed that much.
Limitations from loan repayments aren't the only financial barrier for small businesses today. High inflation rates have created their own set of consumer restrictions, as luxury spending is the first aspect of a budget to be cut. As the owner of an SEO services company, Tanya has insight into how businesses may choose to spend their extra funds.
I think for small businesses, it's often really hard to know what to invest in because they have limited resources. So often that also means knowing what they themselves will be able to commit to.
After Marlene chose to commit to her CEBA loan, she faced additional difficulties moving her business forward, even with this financial aid.
Getting information on particular aspects of the loan has been a nightmare. So when I would call the CRA, I wouldn't get answers from them. When I would call my bank, I wouldn't get answers from them. And so it's been just difficult getting answers from different people or understanding why some business qualified for under certain kind of parameters and why, for example, mine wouldn't.
Many businesses are in the same position as Marlene and are finding paying back their loans difficult. This problem is made worse due to the rising rates of theft in the Vancouver area. Vancouver police statistics show an increase in robberies from 568 cases in 2021 to 672 cases in 2022. And a theft totaling $5,000 rose to 10,991 cases from 2021 from just 9,021 reports in 2021. Small businesses are still on the minds of the Canadian government. Premier David Eby has made efforts to extend the deadline for CEBA loan repayments. Along with all other Canadian premiers, they have sent a joint letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on October 20th of this year. One of many ways the government is trying to help the community. Alternative supports include packages of grants made available through the federal government. Tanya notes one in particular, the Canadian Digital Adaptation Plan's Grow Your Business Online grant. The grant is currently available to aid in the digital presence of Canadian small to mid-sized businesses.
I think the digital part really helps, especially for businesses that have been around for a bit longer and have a bit more of an older infrastructure or that can be brought up to speed for the digital world, because there's people that are missing out on a lot of sales by not being set up for e-commerce and things like that. So I think it's great. The other thing that I've seen passing by quite a lot is how expensive shipping is in Canada, which is, I don't know what the government could do to help with that, but compared to the US, shipping expenses are really, really high for companies, and especially if they're selling smaller items. I've heard a lot of people complain that it really deters their customers how expensive shipping is. So that might be something the government can help with.
Tanya's first-hand experience with her and her customers' businesses provide insight into what the government can do to create effectual change in their financial support efforts. Improvements like this will be better targeted at solving current issues owners are managing. It's something Marlene is calling for as well.
When people enact some of the policies, public policies, and what we saw with COVID, I think they needed to get down to the street level and actually interview businesses and get to really know what was and understand what was really happening.
Shifting these solutions to be shaped around the voices of those affected can better protect these companies and may more likely bring some much-needed revitalization. But it's not all about the government. Local support is increasing as well, as seen in events like farmers markets, small business showcasing, and BCIT's own Winterfest. Here, 23 businesses filled the Grand Hall at Burnaby Campus on November 15th to celebrate their work and connect with buyers. Crowded footsteps, bustling festive melodies, and sparkling lights point to the event's draw and success. The laughter and roaring chatter among budding relationships between customer and owner show how beneficial this direct exposure can be. Vancouver is still in the process of revitalization from these past couple of years. From pandemic restrictions that closed many businesses' doors, to recovering from years of pause in income, it may still take some time to fully come back to before pandemic levels. Thanks to federal government grants and local support, we are seeing the industry begin to revitalize. What will be next in these efforts of regrowth? Maybe some new policies to help improve shipping expenses, or more civil input on these efforts? As long as these attempts to repair the community continue, revitalization will be on its way. This has been Grace Miller with Microlink.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Microlink. Please check out other Microlink episodes on our website, linkbcit.ca. That's linkbcit.ca, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at BCITSA on Instagram to stay connected. Stay safe during the colder months, and we wish you a very happy holiday season.
This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
Be advised that the content of this podcast involves sensitive topics such as drug use and addiction. Listener discretion is advised.
In Canada, psilocybin is an illegal substance which has limited medical exemptions that can result in an improved sale. However, the legalization of marijuana has sparked an increased campaign to use a similar framework to legalize magic mushrooms. In this episode, we speak to 3 experts with lots of experience in the psychological, medical, and legal aspects of psilocybin.
Zach Walsh,
a professor at UBC and a clinical psychologist. A lawyer and retired criminology professor from Simon Fraser University. And Dr. Pamela Crisco, a medical doctor whose expertise is chronic pain and psychedelic-assisted therapies.
Listen, I'm not on drugs. I'm
Isabella Calisi.
And I'm Zach Arabko.
And today's drug history lesson is on psilocybin, or magic mushrooms. Psilocybin is a psychedelic drug that's found in more than 200 species of fungi all around the world. When ingested, its effects include euphoria, visual and mental hallucinations, a distorted sense of time, and perceived spiritual experiences. In 1968, the Canadian government banned the use and possession of psilocybin under 2 distinct laws, the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act and the Food and Drugs Act. Both of these made the drug illegal in both its physical form as a mushroom as well as its chemical form as pure psilocybin. These laws came into effect during the beginning of Richard Nixon's war on drugs in the United States. The war on drugs, or the war on certain drugs, as some experts put it, is a fight against substances in the United States that didn't originate from Western Europe, such as opium, cannabis, and cocaine. Meanwhile, drugs like alcohol and tobacco have not faced prohibition since the 1920s. For drug researchers, lawyers, and doctors, the war on drugs is a topic that has been long debated, discussed, and researched. While those consuming these drugs were impacted, these bans also put a halt to research.
Nixon's war on drugs in the 70s, and no medical evidence was presented at that time, no scientific evidence was presented at that time. They weren't interested. They were interested in criminalizing behaviors, take people out of the political sphere. And so we find ourselves in a position where we're asking this question, should these be legal, when we basically had 40 years of prohibition for no reason?
In the legal landscape, Boyd has a different perspective to the same question.
When we say war on drugs, I think we have to be quite clear. It's a war on certain drugs. Whether it's a war is something that reasonable people can disagree on, but it's certainly the case that some drugs have been criminalized going back to 1908. And cannabis was criminalized from 1923 until 2018, when it became regulated in a manner not that different from alcohol and tobacco. There are some key differences in how each of those drugs are regulated, but it's now a legally regulated drug as opposed to a criminally prohibited drug.
End the war on drugs. It's a stupid, racist catastrophe, and let people have their mushrooms. Been sort of one of the major engines of my life's work has been trying to counter the war on drugs. So very much anti-war on drugs. I mean, look, we legalized cannabis. That was supposed to be the worst one forever, right? Like that was the one that the gateway and all that terrible stuff. And we legalized cannabis, and what's happened? We've seen seniors using more cannabis, and that's it. Turns out everyone who wanted weed was getting weed anyway, which is disappointing to the cannabis industry. There's like, where's our billions and billions of dollars? No, it turns out everyone still grows their own weed, buys it from their friends, but people aren't getting arrested. That's huge. It's huge not only for the people that would be arrested but aren't, but for the rest of us who get to live in a freer, more fair society, and also who are allowed to choose how we alter our consciousness so that we're not, funneled into this alcohol nightmare.
Dr. Zach Walsh believes that the stigmatization of psilocybin stems from the geographical origin of the drug.
The Western European drugs are welcomed, and drugs from other regions, those are dangerous. So cannabis coming from India, the old drugs from Turtle Island before colonial times, dangerous, too dangerous. The reason things like mushrooms were banned was originally part of the Inquisition of the Americas. So they're directly tied to the suppression of indigenous practices and culture. There's no justification for it other than just sheer violence, racism, social control. And then they put a thin veneer of public health on top of it.
As Walsh puts it, this thin veneer of public health has been a questionable one for some time. Dr. Crisco also sees advantages to this research and the potential expanded use of these drugs.
In Canada right now, we have medical assistance in dying that people can apply for and get very quickly in under an hour. It takes me over 8 hours to apply to the government of Canada to get an exemption for somebody to have a psilocybin session if they're at end of life. So I think that one is a yes, and it's a no-brainer. If you have the right to die, like to access medical assistance in dying, then you should surely have absolutely the right to have psilocybin. I think anybody that gets a palliative care diagnosis should automatically qualify for psilocybin-assisted therapy if they wish.
As progress has been made over the years on people's opinions on drugs, so has research into the medical benefits. Both Dr. Walsh and Dr. Crisco have found evidence that psilocybin helps treat patients with both mental and physical ailments. However, along with doctor diagnosis and end-of-life therapy prescriptions, psilocybin is also used recreationally. In Vancouver, there are multiple mushroom dispensaries around, many of which can be found on Google Maps and have accompanying websites. The shops serve anyone over the age of 19 and advocate for a safe supply for everyone.
I mean, Dana Larson, for example, has, set up these shops that were raided.
There's been a raid in Vancouver.
The raid that Crisco and Boyd were referring to was at the trio of mushroom dispensaries that Larson owns in Vancouver. A statement on the store's door reads, "On November 1st, the VPD raided all 3 of our locations. They seized all of our mushrooms, LSD, DMT, coca leaf, and money. We are restocking and will be fully open on November 3rd. This raid is shocking and unexpected. The VPD had previously stated they did not plan on raiding shops like ours. We have a hearing at City Hall on December 6th to decide the future of our business license. We expect the police to let the elected officials make their decisions first before launching raids." In a statement from the Vancouver Police Department, Sergeant Steve Addison said the following: "We have been clear that anyone who breaks the law by illegally trafficking controlled drugs and substances could be arrested and charged with a criminal offense. This includes people who traffic drugs for profit from unlicensed and illegal retail businesses." After learning about the raid, Zach and I decided that we wanted to visit one of the stores. Neither Zach nor I have ever used mushrooms, so in order to gain a better understanding, we ventured out with someone who has experience with microdosing. He asked that we not use his real name for this podcast because of the legally tenuous nature of this particular drug. As a result, we have given him the pseudonym Greg. We're here with an avid shroom user. Would you describe yourself?
I'd say average. I prefer microdoses for sure. Yeah, so I microdose. So somewhere anywhere between like a quarter to a half of a full dose-ish. Just recreationally. It's if you do any research on it, it actually has supposedly a lot of benefits. I think I tend to agree for sure. Yeah, I've only gone to a in-person store once, and that was back in Ontario. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the stores here.
What got you into like using shrooms and such?
Oh, just friends who were into it. This guy did a tab of LSD. That seemed a little bit too intense for me. I did some shrooms with him afterwards. That was still pretty intense. Full doses are a lot. I don't think they're my vibe, that's for sure. But microdosing, honestly, you could sort of if it's like a bigger microdose, you could say it's like a weed high without a lot of the brain fog, I would say, almost. Yeah, I generally prefer it, for sure. And then a smaller microdose, you almost can't even feel. Like a 100 milligrams to 150 milligrams, I can do that and then go start a day of work and honestly do a great job. Yeah, like straight feel better during the day. So
the mushroom dispensary felt very calm and clean. It was compact and had space for about 5 customers. The menus are on the back wall behind the counter. They were printed out onto standard printer paper in bright pink Comic Sans. Beyond their supply of drugs, they also sell drug parody-themed books written by Dana Larson. Green Buds and Hash and Harry Pothead were just 2 examples. The employees were friendly, giving Greg recommendations on products and selling him on trying a microdose in the form of a chocolate bar. Once Greg selected his items for purchase, he had to fill out a form and show some photo ID confirming his age. He received a membership card in case he wanted to make any future purchases at the store. There were a number of free informational pamphlets on the medical benefits of the drug, as well as information about the other drugs that were available. The employees we spoke to encouraged us to read through them if we were interested in trying anything. The staff at the store declined to be interviewed, but confirmed off the record that people of all walks of life came into the shop, from young to old, new users to regulars. We asked Greg, after we went to the mushroom dispensary, what his final thoughts were after our visit.
That place was definitely not the place I was expecting to get a membership card from. That was probably the most legal gray zone area place we've been to today. But it's cool to know that they're all collecting data to try and be on the legal side, because realistically, if they're not collecting data, they're just operating like without names or anything. They don't have much of a say in their legality. So it's good to know they're all trying.
What have you learned today about like Vancouver shops versus like the one that you've tried in Ottawa? And would you say it's similar to any other types of shops you've been to?
I would say the biggest difference is that the shops here are fighting a much bigger fight. From what they've said, they're working with societies of nurses and a lot of different stuff to actually gather medical data on shrooms to help their fight with legalization. And that's just pretty huge. Feels like it makes me want to support them.
Our adventure spawned a lot of talk about legalization. We wanted to ask those we encountered in the mushroom dispensary about their opinions on legalization. There was positivity and hope about it. The people we spoke to believe that psilocybin will go the same route as cannabis did and soon become legalized. Going back to Dr. Walsh, he admitted there's still a lot to figure out.
So how do we balance the risks of people taking mushrooms and causing a harm or a nuisance to themselves and to society while still maintaining the cognitive liberty? And I guess
Walsh's use of the word liberty sparked a thought. Could there be a potential challenge through the courts? We asked our experts with legal and criminal backgrounds for their thoughts on psilocybin legalization, and if cannabis has laid down any potential groundwork for psilocybin's future.
We have a Section 7 challenge to cannabis. Malmo Levine, I think, was the case. There was a strong minority, I think it was a 6-3 decision of the Supreme Court of Canada in favor of continuing with criminalization. But 3 justices of the Supreme Court took the position that criminalization of possession should end. There are some similarities, but I mean, there's some differences with the 2 drugs, but there's certainly similarities. With cannabis, there's recreation and medicine. They're both angles to it. But I would argue for most people, it's recreation. But now we're seeing, with end of life situations that people have an interest in using psilocybin to help cope. Yeah, I think there is a similarity, to be sure, between the approach that we have developed with cannabis and now what we're seeing with psilocybin. But again, there are some key differences between those 2 drugs.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. I mean, my first degree is criminology. If we put all the experts in the decision-making places, this would move easily in government. Like if you took all of us doctors that have been working in this and know the science and research it, and we could make the decisions, this would happen. We'd have thoughtful policy, we'd have great training programs, we would have great therapy centers. It would be brilliant. Our system's not like that.
We want to ask Dr. Crisco her thoughts on how the medical field's opinions have changed towards psilocybin in the aftermath of marijuana legalization, given her expertise in chronic pain and psychedelic-assisted therapies.
It's really moved a lot. Like there's still a lot of people out there that are completely naive and have no idea and are still indoctrinated by the war on drugs. I remember this point going, where will we be in 5 years? And it accelerated beyond that. It's everywhere in popular media. Like I don't watch a lot of television or movies, but when I do, there's almost always a reference to psychedelics in the positive, not in the negative.
During our conversation with Dr. Welsh, he presented an analogy comparing the ability to ski on an unrecognized hill in Kelowna to eating a random mushroom you find on the ground. It's a comparison that's stuck with us. He also tied this idea back to the potential interference of laws on life and liberty.
I live on the side of a mountain here in Kelowna, and I can see the big white ski hill. And I know my neighbors have skis, but they don't just ski off the side of the mountain. I imagine there would be some bylaw against it, but it's not that we've criminalized skiing. We've made a really nice place where people can go ski, and then they just go there because it's safer and better in all ways than skiing off the side of the mountain. And so I think psilocybin could be like that. If we create pathways for optimal psilocybin experience, people will use it safely. Really, if we think about what do we want to do with different drug regulations, we want to minimize the risks and accentuate the benefits. Baseline, there is a benefit of just liberty. Just here's a mushroom that grows on the ground. I can put it in my mouth if I want.
Psilocybin legalization continues to be a hot topic of discussion. Research for mental health benefits are all coming out with positive results, and drug activists believe it will follow the same pathway as cannabis. All we can do in the meantime is sit back and see what the courts and politicians decide. Thank you to our listeners for joining us, and thank you to our interviewees, Dr. Zach Welsh, Dr. Pamela Crisco, and Neil Boyd, for speaking with us and entertaining our questions. And a special thank you to Greg for joining us on our little adventure. This episode was written, reported, and produced by Isabel Khaleesi and Zach Arabko. Our intro music was provided by Gorn Andrick, and the audio clip by Digital Smoke Studios. The outro music was provided by Theo JT. All sounds were licensed through freesound.org. I'm Isabel Khaleesi.
And I'm Zach Arabko.
And we'll see you again in our next episode, where we'll discuss the origin and potential legalization of LSD.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretnero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.